Patricia, thank you so much again for joining us. And says, interesting timing, Adam. The debate today in Germany is against nuclear energy because of Fukushima. Oh,
yeah, and I think what we
that's actually a question. I just didn't pose it as a question.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it brings an interesting perspective into play, which is, and to be a little provocative on it, and Caroline can maybe say this a little bit more eloquently than I can, but what we've learned following Fukushima, and there's actually a really interesting article that came out, I don't know, a couple of days ago, about this very issue and looking at sort of the lessons learned actually to draw from Fukushima. And one of the big highlights of that was focusing on the fact that it's very clear nuclear plays an absolutely critical role if we have any hope at decarbonization. And Germany's push actually away from that, while they also claim and act like they care about driving forward clean energy, are at odds, right? They're at odds with each other. And in fact, their focus on shutting down nuclear has actually increased the emissions in their power sector in many ways. And that's, that just doesn't make sense if they're also trying to drive, clean energy adoption and generation. And I think the challenge that they faced in terms of, okay, well, the relative risks and benefits and challenges and what you need to look at with nuclear, when you see what happened with Fukushima, in many ways, obviously new technologies, advanced technologies can obviate those challenges. But also, at the same time, we've learned what are the long-term implications of what happened there. And we found that was a pretty catastrophic event, but we've also found that, people were able to leave. And if anything, the sort of mad rush and evacuation, it was more harmful than any of the radiation that came out from the plant. And combining that with the devastation that the actual earthquake and tsunami caused, which was actually the human tragedy situation there, it kind of, puts in perspective what the actual, I'd say sort of challenges and trade-offs are of trying to shut down a clean energy source that by metric is the safest form of energy we have. Sort of because we have concern over the catastrophic events that can happen. And as we've learned more from these catastrophic events, again, to sound a little crass, they're not quite as catastrophic as people often sort of hear or make them out to be, especially when you think about how the media covered it, which sort of left this open-ended doomsday scenario that was never tied up because it wasn't a doomsday scenario. Anyway, Caroline can probably add a little bit better color to that, but I think it's an interesting challenge to say, hey, if you want to shut your nuclear down, then you can go do that and embrace dirtier energy. But then what are the long-term health effects of that, right? And that's very clearly documented as well.
In Germany, where I used to have a large business, and then Germany is very, their regulatory regime and their taxing regime is very hostile. America hasn't seen that type of regime here yet. I don't know what happens next. But while I was there was measurements that were just beginning about, and I'm going to mess it up, right? But about like the amount of pollution that was going into the air. And it was getting to be third world level pollution because of the switch in fuels.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest catastrophe. I think that's why we're seeing this shift toward being very, we're seeing, Jake and I were just talking about last night. It feels almost unreal, but it's so great to see a huge shift. And mostly, I think, younger generations that didn't grow up under 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or don't remember that. I think that's a big part of it. But I think part of it is too, like, we see climate as an imperative. And yeah, there's maybe shades of gray to everything, or goods and bads, but largely, nuclear still provides a majority of the clean power, emission-free power in the United States. And if we want to move quickly toward clean air or, less carbon, it's kind of got to be the ticket. So we need to figure that out. And I think part of why we're so motivated to do something really new here is you can use fission in a totally new way to address all these problems while still keeping online the existing plants that are so crucial to making sure we don't make huge step changes toward more pollution like you're talking about.
And there's a lot of questions here, but I've got a question that's a follow-up to Tracy's question is, do you see Germany and the EU that's had a lot of difficulties, and I'm pretty familiar with it because I've done the forensics on it for my own businesses, but do you see them as kind of a leading indicator, both in their hostility towards nuclear from the regulatory perspective and also kind of from the marketing of it and people's kind of ambivalence? So isn't that a leading indicator for what we can expect here?
I don't think so at all, because the EU itself is even divided, and internally, I mean, you look at France, they realized pretty quickly the benefits of going nuclear in the 70s, and talk about one of the greatest success stories in deep decarbonization, what France did. Maybe the next one of the other greatest stories was what Sweden did, both largely driven on the backs of nuclear deployment. And, France sees that role and the need for that continuing, and they've made investments to support new plants, even looking at being able to sell the energy that they can generate from these plants to Germany because Germany's issues. But you see that, and it's sort of, I think, split across in certain areas. But Germany's definitely stood up. There's a few other countries that are kind of making this decision, and they're seeing the real term implications of it. Right? There's a lot of, I think, trying to polish it to make it look like it's a different thing going on than what it really is. But it's a pretty clear failure in policy towards carbon reduction. Whereas you see the successes out there between countries like France and Sweden. So we actually see in the EU, there's quite a bit of interest in nuclear in different countries. Not just, Germany might be one of the exceptions to it, but I think generally speaking, there's quite a bit of interest from others, especially as they look at what these advanced technologies can do, because they look so differently in terms of their safety profile as well as their economic profile. And I think in the US, it's a pretty significantly different environment as well, because we see the value that nuclear plays for our grid, right? It makes the majority of our clean energy in this country. And they also see the importance of it. When you shut it down, it's often largely replaced
but do you guys
by
see
dirty energy.
Do you see the I interrupted again, right?
No, please do it. It's fine.
No, so there's tricks to it. If we were in a restaurant, right, because this is like a lunch type of thing, I would, and I wanted to interrupt, but I didn't really want to be that rude, right? Because it is kind of rude, is I would order something from the waiter. You ever see that? You go like this while you're talking, and I would say, like this. You see that? I would like call over the waiter, and I'd be like, can I get more water, right?